This lecture will focus on the Mexican-American War. Texas had been a problem between America and Spain, and then America and Mexico for a very long time. The problem started with Spain in 1803, where the United States thought and claimed that Texas was a part of the Louisiana Purchase. They argued about it, people tried to settle it, and eventually the Adams-Onis Treaty solved that in 1819 when it ended the American claim to the land. But this idea of taking Mexican territory and taking Mexican land still had a really strong support from the people of America. And this only got worse during John Tyler's presidency because the 10th president of the United States, John Tyler, remember he became president when William Henry Harrison died, and he was the vice president at this point, and he brought the annexation question up to Congress. And really, there were a lot of people who were okay with annexation, but the problem was there were a lot of Southerners that had moved into Texas and they had brought their slaves with them. And so all of a sudden, if this is happening, we know that Texas is going to be admitted and they are going to support slavery. And so that might break off and change that balance between free states and slave states if we admit Texas without any other free states. And so that was a problem. But John Tyler put together a packet of materials, supporting materials, and in it he made a big mistake by including a letter written by the Secretary of State, John C. Calhoun, who's a famous pro-slavery person. And it basically not only said why we should take it in, but also had a really, really strong defense of slavery as an institution. So of course this made the people from the North very mad, and the vote failed to annex Texas, with 35 people voting against it, or 35 votes against it, and 16 votes for annexation of Texas. So where did people stand? Where did America stand on annexing Texas? Mexico, first off, never even recognized their independence. They never actually said, okay, Texas is its own country, and so they, of course, thought you can't annex it, it's part of our country. The South wanted the Texas to join the Union to make slavery stronger, and the North did not want Texas to join the Union because they knew that that would make the institution of slavery stronger, and they did not want that to happen. They wanted it to, remember, die off and be gone forever. And so the election of 1844 came up, where John Tyler had kind of messed this whole thing up and pretty much destroyed his chances for re-election. And so in the election of 1844, the Democrat was James K. Polk, and the Whig was Henry Clay. Okay, and James K. Polk was a former congressperson and was currently the governor of Tennessee, and his platform was, we are going to gain this land. We're going to take in Texas, we're going to take in Oregon, we're going to annex both of those places. They're going to be ours. And then we will go to Mexico and we will purchase California from them so that we can get all the way across from sea to sea and really finish off this manifest destiny. And this really made everyone happy because we could expand and make our country bigger, but also keep the balance of slavery opinions, with some southern states being added, as well as northern states like California, Oregon, that would potentially not want slavery. Against him was Henry Clay. He was a Whig senator. He was also running for president. And, you know, there was kind of back and forth in the Whig Party about annexation, but a lot of people were supporting James K. Polk in his idea of annexation, so Henry Clay kind of had to support it under a little bit of pressure. And so now all of a sudden, the anti-slavery party looks at this and says, we're not voting for you. And so they voted for the Liberty Party, a third party, and that split all of the votes in the Whig Party, and therefore Polk won easily and became the 11th president of the United States. When Polk became president, he promised to do all of these things. He promised to work very hard. He also promised to only take one term in office. He said, I will get this all done. I will work as hard as I can for these 4 years, and then I will not run for president again. So James K. Polk thought the United States had a clear and unquestionable, in his own words, right to the Oregon country. So this map, this entire pink region is the Oregon country. Okay, for some reason my pen is not working. There we go. Okay, this entire pink region is the Oregon country, or orange, or whatever you want to call it. And he thought that, or what this included was the 49th parallel, which is right here. That's what we kind of use right now as the border. Okay, but he thought it also included all of this stuff up here, and that America had the right to that as well. And so his rallying cry was 54-40 or fight. So basically, if we are not allowed to control all of the land south of that line of latitude, 54 degrees and 40 minutes north, then we would fight Britain over it. However, really, most Americans did not want to fight the British. It was more than they wanted to do. It wouldn't be worth it, not over this piece of land. And so in June of 1846, they sat down at the table and came up with the Oregon Treaty. The Oregon Treaty said everything below the 49th parallel, again, that's this line right here, okay, everything below the 49th parallel belongs to America, except the bottom half of Vancouver Island over here, because it wouldn't make sense to cut off that island in the middle and have this half of an island that belonged to America. That just didn't make sense. And so everything to the north of that line is controlled by the British and would later become part of Canada, and everything to the south would be controlled by the Americans. Another part of this was that the British were guaranteed to be able to use the Columbia River. So it's a very important river, starts up there in the British territory and snakes its way all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. So they needed that to be able to get to the ocean to trade their goods. Take a minute to write out the answer to checkpoint 1. So President Tyler was able to, in his last few days, push a resolution through Congress before he left Polk in charge. And Texas did join the Union in 1845, becoming part of the United States. Now, of course, we can expect that Mexico would not be happy because they still had not recognized Texas's independence, and so they immediately broke off relations with the USA. And then to make it even worse, there were border disputes on where did Texas actually end. And so Mexico believed that it was this red line, the Nueces River, okay, and on up throughout there. So they really thought that kind of this yellow area was all of Texas that had been annexed, whereas the U.S. thought it was the Rio Grande River, this one right here, okay, and Rio Grande River is kind of a goofy way of saying it because Rio means river, so it means a big river, but the Rio Grande, that made it a much larger territory, much larger area, bigger by 150 miles from this Nueces River all the way down to the Rio Grande. And so Polk decided that he was going to send his people, like he had promised to do, to Mexico, and he did that to buy California, but the Mexican government refused to meet with that person and said, we will not even meet with you to talk about it, much less sell you California, because they were so frustrated by the Americans, the way they perceived it, stealing their land. So America saw the writing on the wall and realized that diplomacy was just not going to work with Mexico because they were so angry, and so they had to take a different track to get this land that they wanted. And so the first thing Polk did was he sent Zachary Taylor down and to lead his American troops across the Nueces River, but not into past the Rio Grande River. So they were on their own land according to America, but according to Mexico, they viewed it as an invasion into Mexico. And so, of course, the Mexican troops attacked them. Okay, so it's kind of a tricky thing. It's kind of, he tricked those people into attacking him. Polk did, because he sent them onto what they thought was their own land. And of course, they're going to attack. But as soon as he was attacked, Polk went to Congress with that evidence and said, we have to be at war. We are now at war by an act of Mexico herself. She attacked us on our own land. Mexico attacked us on our own land. And so we have to go to war. And on May 13th, Congress agreed with him and voted to declare war on Mexico. And so they had a strategy. They had a three-pronged military strategy. The first prong was to send one general in to capture Santa Fe in the north. Okay, and so that would be moving through here, coming from America and moving in here. And the plan was to capture Santa Fe there. And then also one group would go out to the west and capture and take over California and kind of move down through and take that over. And then the last one would be the most, or very important one, and that would be to move down to the south into Mexico City and make them surrender. Okay, so we've got a lot going down into this Mexico City area. And so Congress thought that they needed to call out for about 50,000 volunteers, and so they did, and they ended up getting 73,000 men who joined and wanted to fight the war. They saw it as an adventure. They wanted to be a part of it. Okay, the problem was they were really pretty undisciplined and unruly, and so they made for a really difficult training period to be able to get them into top shape to actually become soldiers, trained soldiers. And so it made it kind of tricky to be a leader in this army because they had a lot of men, but they were not very well trained and not very well disciplined. So now we're going to talk about those three prongs. The first prong being Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma. This is Zachary Taylor's troops. They were sent in to defeat the Mexican forces and then move south into Mexico City to try and get to Mexico City. And so they defeated the Mexican forces in Palo Alto and Resaca de la Palma, and within 4 months he had made his way all the way down to Monterrey, Mexico. So he was making great progress down in there. And then we have Colonel Stephen W. Kearny. Okay, that's this guy up top. And he led his troops into Santa Fe, and so this was one of the prongs to take over Santa Fe. And by the time him and his troops got to Santa Fe, they took over this town without having to fire a single shot, because by the time they arrived, the Mexicans had retreated and left back down towards Mexico City. And so he went on with a small force. He left some of his group to defend Santa Fe and went on with a small force towards California to help out there. And the man that he was helping out was this man. This is John C. Fremont, General John C. Fremont, who led some settlers in North California in an uprising against the Mexicans there. Now remember, California was pretty not populated. There were not very many people there, and there just was not a very big Mexican government presence there. And so these settlers kind of easily defeated the Mexicans there. And on June 14th of 1846, they declared themselves independent of Mexico. So they became their own country as well. They became known as the Bear Flag Republic, but that country only lasted for a couple of weeks because a few weeks later the American Navy came in, took control, and California became part of America. Take a moment to write out the answer to checkpoint number 2. So in this war, Mexico did a whole lot of losing, and this was no different. Mexico was losing a lot of land, but just would not surrender. And so Polk decided that the only way to get them to surrender is to finish the last prong and attack Mexico City to force them to surrender. So he sent troops on ships to Veracruz, which was near Mexico City, and General Winfield Scott, this guy right here, okay, he was in charge of the troops there. He landed in March, and within 20 days he had taken Veracruz over, and from there was able to march his men toward Mexico City. When he arrived at Mexico City, he stormed the Chapultepec Castle, which is kind of the defense. Think of it like the defense center for Mexico City, and stormed it for 2 days and was able to take it over and enter Mexico City. And he took control of Mexico City on September 14th, and this occupation would very quickly force the Mexican army and the Mexican government to surrender and start heading to the treaty table. And on February 2nd, 1848, they signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo set up something called the Mexican Cession. The Mexican Cession was where they ceded, so gave up 500,000 square miles of territory to the United States. They gave up all of California, they gave up all of Utah, they gave up all of Nevada, they gave up New Mexico, parts of New Mexico that weren't already belonging to the United States. They gave up parts of Arizona. They gave up parts of Colorado, a small part of Colorado, and a small part of Wyoming as well. And they agreed that the border was not the Nueces River, but was actually the Rio Grande River, like the Americans had wanted. And in return for all of this land, the United States would pay $15 million and take over about $3.25 million in Mexican debts that they owed other people. And so they gave them money for all the land that they had taken. But the interesting thing is now, with the Oregon Territory as part of America and everything over here as part of America, now Manifest Destiny is realized. The United States went all the way from the Atlantic Ocean all the way over to touching the Pacific Ocean. And they had overspread the continent. They had taken over the continent that they were trying to do. And that, remember, the idea of Manifest Destiny said that God had given to the Americans. Take a minute to write out 3 questions that you have from the notes so far. If you don't have any, then you can create 3 test questions that you might see on a quiz or a test from this material.